Hi, everybody. I wanted to welcome you back to the Multi-Million Dollar Brands podcast and introduce you to Dane Sanders. And before this podcast started in the green room, we were trying to figure out how long we've known each other. Would you say it was 15 years?
I think so.
Something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And we both came from the photography industry. And Dane is an incredible coach. He's a talented consultant. He's an advisor. He's somebody that many leaders trust. And I think after you listen to what he has to say today, you'll see exactly why that is. So thank you so much for being here, Dane.
Thank you, Laura. It's really a privilege. And I do like that we have longevity. There's something about water under bridges that you can't go by. You just need to experience. And we both experienced a lot of common realities. So I'm really thrilled to be in this conversation. Thanks.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that this speaks to is the power of relationships. And you and I have known each other for a long time. You go into touch and out of touch and into touch and out of touch. And then we just connected as if years had not even passed
Mhm.
prior to this. And when it comes to building a multi-million dollar brand and coming in and out of different types of businesses and continuing to do what we do as entrepreneurs, which is to build again, when you pivoted from the industry that we both came from, which is photography, what
Mm.
made you decide to go into the business that you're in right now, which is tell me your dreams?
Yeah, I love the question. Some of it, and this is not new to you, but might be new to some folks who are listening, is you think about the evolution of the industry itself. So that's kind of one lens I'll talk about for a second, and then there's the evolution of me and myself over the course of seasons, and then there's also um, kind of the cultural moment, the bigger picture thing that isn't about industry or me, but just kind of a broader collective that we're all navigating. And I think it was really the kind of overlap of those three realities, because in the photo industry in particular, I started my career in photography back when it was film, pre-digital, but it was just kind of the tail end of that. And I jumped into the digital world and went full force into digital. I thought, oh, this is such good news for people like me. And it was for that moment. And shot for about 12 years. But over the course of those 12 years, especially early on, I started making observations and writing things down. And I created this, I kind of became a known quantity in our industry because I was a messenger saying what seemed kind of obvious to me, that analog was probably not going to win. Digital was definitely going to win. And in a digital world where you're yourname.com, you probably should figure out who you are, because everyone has now a microphone, or like we can all, megaphone, really. Anyone can speak and people can potentially hear us now. And back then that wasn't possible.
Right.
So I was talking about these kinds of things about who you are and how do you build in a certain direction. But then the industry kept going, and we started seeing things like Kodak disappearing,
Right.
and like massive tectonic shifts in industry. And I began to lose faith in that as a professional enterprise, as a thing to go after. Um, so for me, the way I'm wired, if I believe in a thing, I can go hard for a long time. But kind of the moment I don't, I end up just kind of losing heart. Now, I am a believer that the photography industry is an industry that can work really well, but you need to be very clear about the value you're bringing to the table, how you're packaging that, systematizing that, and delivering. And but in a world where everyone has a phone in their pocket, it's a different kind of world than when you and I used to be in it. So part of it was just the industry. The second was just my own kind of maturation process of realizing, who am I? I think I've heard this before. In your 20s, you think you can do everything. In your 30s, you realize, man, I'm not sure I can do anything. In your 40s, you realize, oh, I can probably do a few things. In your 50s, you realize you can do one thing. And in your 60s, you do it. And I'm 50. I just turned 50. So I'm like, I think I'm kind of tuning in a little to myself. And that was kind of that narrowing process of like, I'm just more clear about what I can offer, um, and just to trust other people who can offer in other categories much better things than I can, and be really happy that those can coexist. And then the last part was just this cultural shift of like, where is this world going? What are we in the middle of? What do I want to build? What's my own legacy in the midst of these kind of twists and turns that so many are navigating? Getting older and seeing friends, long-term marriages break up, or people having kids, or
Mhm.
my watching really even the reinvention of my own marriage over and over and over again. We've been married 24 years. But really, I think I've just met my seventh wife. It's the same person, but she evolves and I evolve. And I think all of those things combined, as the world is waking up in certain ways and falling asleep in other ways, I'm just more clear than ever that I just don't want to waste a minute. I feel the most awake I've ever been in my life. And I want to get more awake. I want to pursue highest and best, both for me and those that I have a chance to interact with in this brief life we have.
What you're talking about is disruption. And you were disrupted. You disrupted in a lot of ways your own path. And I did the same thing a few years ago from the photography industry. And whether or not you are staying in your category or staying in your lane in 2020, or whether or not you're pivoting into something completely new, I think everybody has had to face that type of interruption this year.
Mm-hmm.
So, what made you decide that the current business that you're in, which is called Tell Me Your Dreams, which I want you to talk about next, what
Mm-hmm.
made you decide that's for me, that's where I want to go next?
Mm-hmm. So, quick backstory: when I was an undergraduate, I studied marketing, and I felt like I learned how to manipulate people to buy things they didn't want or need, and I felt gross about it. So then, I went and studied philosophy in grad school, which is, undergrad business, graduate philosophy. You're supposed to be flipped. The way I did it was like a recipe for unemployment or teaching. So way before my photo world, I was a teacher. I taught at the liberal arts college, and I had just kind of in a sense lost faith in marketing as an enterprise, and that got reinvented for me. I actually fell in love with marketing through exposures, through common colleagues like you and I both know, like Seth Godin and others, and even buying into narratives and how those things work. But ultimately, in grad school, when I was studying Aristotelian virtue ethics, the good life, how do you become a good person? How do you have a good life? I cared a lot about that for self-interest, but I also cared a lot about that for those I cared about and those I cared less for, like, people that are not in my world. And really asked the question, like, how do humans flourish? How do you have a great existence? So the more I've reflected and worked on that as a set of ideas, the more I wanted to work that into my professional life. And I kind of, that's how I stumbled into consulting and coaching, honestly, was when I left the teaching world and I had written some books and was traveling and speaking. I kept finding myself in this advocate role, this advisor role, where I just wanted whatever project was in front of me, I wanted it to win. And how could I
Mm.
contribute to that happening? And Tell Me Your Dreams was an effort to do that really through an innovation that I'd never really thought of before, that I'm seeing the fruit of, and it's extraordinary. And here it is in a nutshell. Every employer, every entrepreneur, every person who's listening to your podcast right now, they wish all of their employees would care about their dream as much as they do.
Mm.
The problem is all those employees have dreams of their own. So how in the world do you harness the dreams that they have and put them in the same direction of what you're trying to build, but also honor the fact that they're in their own disruptive evolutionary process? And you probably only have them for a season. And if you have them for that season, how could you get them the best out of them? And how could you contribute your best to them in such a way that they would look back with great esteem? They would say, that season transformed the trajectory of my life, and give you credit, send you business, send you good vibes, whatever comes from those things. And that's what we've done, is we built an organization that supports employees achieving their dreams. I have a little army of therapists trained as coaches who go in and help employees figure out who they are, what they want, name it as a dream, declare it to the company, and then put themselves on the hook to achieve that dream. And we coach them through that whole process. And the result is people have radical loyalty. They can't believe that even if they don't have a dream job, they have a job that helps them achieve their dreams. Their sense of, like, I can't believe I get to work here. Glassdoor ratings go through the roof, and they tell their friends to come work here. You can't believe this, that they get to do this. But they also learn, like, grit, like how to get through hard seasons, because dreams are easy to declare and hard to execute on. And when they get in that tough middle space, they have a coach with them to learn how to get over those hurdles and those developmental challenges, uh, and that translates directly into the workplace. They learn that grit shows up everywhere in their life. And then also just a sense of intrinsic motivation as they become more competent and more true to themselves with their dreams and more connected to others as people support each other. They become just better as people. And that self-awareness that leads to kind of self-actualization or betterment, that translates holistically both at work and in their life. There's less burnout, less depression, anxiety, all those things. So we even get to kind of smuggle in pro health in the workplace, and it's probably the most rewarding work I've ever had a chance to be a part of.
So good. And so I have a lot of questions about
Yeah.
how the employee employer dynamic works. Because
Yes.
if you are the CEO of a company and you're leading teams of people, and I've
Yep.
been in this position before, it is very easy to fall into the story of, well, if I give them too much,
Yeah.
I'm going to be taken advantage of.
That's right.
Or if I let them dream on what they want, at the end of the day, I'm actually just paying them to be here and do what I say. And what if it is completely in contradiction with the direction in which I'm headed for this company? How
Mm-hmm.
do you deal with that dynamic between the leader and then these employees who are going through their own sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like the self-actualization
Yep.
process, while on payroll?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember being in a conversation early on with a colleague of ours that I won't, early colleague that I won't name names, but uh, I remember him saying like, we're talking about Michael Gerber's E-Myth or something, and he's like, yeah, I don't let any of my employees read that book. It's a
You don't want
similar,
them to think too independently.
but there's a sense in which what you're describing is, well, let me say one more thing too. None of what I'm describing is altruistic. This is not, let's woo woo take care of our people because it's the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do, but that's not why I'm encouraging people to consider it. It's highly pragmatic. And I think the mindset you're describing is kind of a hangover from the industrial era where
Mm.
humans were cogs and wheels. And yeah, it was highly transactional. I pay you. In fact, if you think of the system, it's kind of a Milton Friedman style capitalism that I don't buy. It's not a stakeholder capitalism. It's a you exist to serve the shareholders. That's what capitalism is. And I disagree with that fundamentally. And now I think the culture is caught up to that. So here's what I mean. If I look at if I'm going to go hire somebody, my job in our current system is to get the most talent for the least amount of money. And the employee's job in the negotiation is to get the most money for the least amount of effort. And and there's a sense in which we are mutually exploitive. My job is to take advantage of you. Your job is to take advantage of
Wow.
me. We negotiate it out, and I understand it. Like it's how capitalism works. It's how you kind of build and create more value over time. Um, but what if there was an alternative where we could create a little bit more like, I hate words like synergy because it can mean nothing and everything, but we're quite truly like, um, I could help you and you could help me and we would both get better through the process. What might that look like? So here's an example. Um, Person A comes and works for me. He goes through, tell me your dreams. He names his dream, and his dream is to be like you someday and run a competitive company. Like trying to think of the worst possible scenario, right?
It'd be the worst possible scenario for like any of my clients
Yes.
or anybody
Yeah,
that I know. It'd be like, here's
totally.
the door,
Right.
change the passwords while they're getting to their car and cut
Right.
off the credit card. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand that. But what if you could actually do it in such a way where that individual, um, and by the way, we have safeguards against this. So I say this without concern, but I'm giving an extreme example. Um, you could actually have that extreme of an example. And if you have what Aristotle described as the three ingredients to a great conversation: intelligence, goodwill, and candor. If you actually had a relationship with your employees in such a way where you had agreement that while you're here, my expectation of you is to be like through the roof, like no kidding, the best, most significant commitment you could ever make, your best while you're here at this moment in life. And when you're gone, we will celebrate it. We will cheer you on. We'll call it positive turnover. But here's what often happens, and all the data like backs this up. most employees are radically disengaged at the workplace.
Yeah.
They're contributing like fractional amounts of their best efforts. And why? Because they're incentivized to. They're incentivized to hold their best back unless you buy it. But if you actually make an agreement where and create a space where like that employee that says is brave enough to say, I'm actually interested in creating a company that competes with yours someday. And you are brave enough to say back, well, that someday isn't today. That's today you're working here. Are you willing to give your best while you're here? Yes, great. Well, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to call in financial. We're going to call in legal. We're going to talk through the realities of what it'll take. We're a scale business. You're a non-scale business. This is the price you're going to have to pay over time. This is probably what you're going to get while you're here in this season, but you're probably 4 years out from being in a place where you're going to get there. Are you going to bootstrap? Are you going to raise money? How are you going to like, it's a whole set of conversations. And that reveal, that transparency opens up a handful of things. One, surprisingly, a lot of those employees go, that looks like a lot of work. Do
Never
I
mind.
do you and I have a pretty good job where I have this much rapport and esteem with my boss. Maybe I could adjust my vision so I could be a VP at this company and negotiate something where I can be a part of making something even more extraordinary. That's a very common response. Another
Interesting.
response is like, I'm going to go do it, but they're going to go build a boutique solopreneur shoppy thing that isn't going to compete at all. And really this becomes a feeder to this. So when clients get out of scope, guess where they send them? They send them right here. And why do they do that? Because they trust each other, because they understand they trade on relational trust. And I would argue that relational trust, we are in a democratized world. Everything is flat. None of it, like we've known this for a while, but it's finally kicking in. It's not theoretical, it's real. And employees understand their worth. I'm interviewing 4 interns right now. Um, and you'd think I'm applying to them. Like their level of understanding of the value they bring to the table and what they expect in terms of a transparent relationship where I'm clear on, look, I'm giving you an entry level thing that's like actually pre-entry level,
Yeah.
but my interest is to set you up so that you flourish like long haul. Now I'm offering a value proposition that's in tune with their generation and in tune with what they're after, because they want a human, they want to flourish, they understand the nature of the world they're living in far better than we do. And I have a lot to learn from them, so I am applying for them to come into my company. And I think if I'm going to do that, I need to create a space that's highly attractive, but also doesn't foolishly set me up to lose.
I think about my clients and the people that I know who are growing businesses and they're in that hiring process. Is there any way in which you want to establish this type of culture before people even get in the door?
Yeah, well, the culture conversation is everything. This is a contribution to the culture you're building. And there's a lot of ways to build a fantastic culture, but all of them, what they have in common is kind of what I nodded to earlier, which is a sense of relational trust. That's what you're trading on. So if I'm in a hiring mode, um, do I need to have a culture? That chicken egg question: do you build the culture and then have the person come, or do you
Hmm.
have the person come and then you build the culture? I would I would advocate for, you are building a culture. You have a culture right now, whether you know it or not. So to be honest and I guess brave enough to be say, what is our culture in the process of hiring this individual right here, as we bring this person on, what are we setting them up for? There's some really interesting data these days about the gap between an employee's expectation on the way in the door and the employee's experience once they're there. Like everyone can relate to this, right? Their first job, they were so excited, they couldn't believe they had their dream job, and 9 months later they're like, they're contemptuous. Like they just don't
Yeah.
appreciate any of the things that they had before. What is that gap about? Well, I would argue the gap is about expectations and experiences. That needs to shrink radically. And to do that, you need to create a very human workspace where you honor the fact that other humans are humans with the same dignity that you deserve. And to do that, we shouldn't be exploited. We should be clear in our expectations that we're going to ask a ridiculous amount of you while you're here. And you need to perform at a high level. And if you do that, we are going to not just pay you money and give you foosballs and free lunch. Like we're going to give you a sense of like a pathway to actually become who you think you want to become, with an acknowledgement that there's going to be rogue waves in your life. You know, people get sick, or a spouse moves, or people have babies, or unexpected upsets. And um, we're going to be with you in that process too. But through it all, our interest is to, in this season, that we get to collaborate together. Kind of like every time you and I get to reconnect.
Yeah.
Like we want that connection to be one of like, I want the best for Laura. I know Laura wants the best for me. That's why we support each other whenever we have a chance to. And that collegial, fraternal relationship, I just think is the future. It's the expectation. Our dream at TMYD is to have it be that every employee who'd go to apply for any job would ask the question, well, how are you going to help me achieve my dreams while I'm here? While I'm helping you with yours. And that there'd be a really, really strong answer for that. And the application of this, of course, is all over the place. But um, to answer your question, uh, do you build the culture or first or later? You are building it right now. And I would just embrace that with all you can.
You're talking about making it intentional versus unintentional
Mm-hmm.
and accidental versus purposeful. It's
Yeah.
so interesting because I do a lot of this work on the brand side of things. So on
Mm,
the branding, I encourage my clients to know their mission and vision and values and to understand their ideal client and not in a superficial way, but in an actual meaningful way.
mhm.
And what you're really thinking about is that almost the employee is the customer in a lot of ways,
Yeah. No, I mean,
where, yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I got
yeah,
excited.
yeah,
But
no, good.
well, we think about our, so I do a lot of work with Don Miller and the story brand people and all that hero's journey, just stealing from Joseph Campbell and applying it to the marketplace. Well, there's no difference if I'm trying to get a customer. That's great, but what about the supply side? What about if I'm in the service business and I'm employing people? I need to invest in. They're on a journey too. They're on a hero's journey that I get to be a guide in their world. And just like if I'm going to position as a guide to the customer. In fact, if we're the organizational lead, that's our job in almost every relationship, is to be the guide, to be the one that has been there, understands where the person is coming from, but has authority to help get them where they want to go, where they see me as instrumental to where they go. Because every employee is looking at the company not as I'm so lucky to be here. They're looking at it as instrumental to their aspirations.
Hmm.
Full stop. And so in a sense, everyone's a stepping stone in a sense, but wouldn't it be great if we didn't look at it as stepping stones? What if we looked at it as like a stopping point where I get to invest my best for this season in both directions? And now we're playing a much higher stake game. And I think organizations that understand this, especially ones that are looking to scale, like let's say you're in high growth mode and you're like, just, oh, you have a heartbeat, you're hired, come on.
Right. Right.
Which is so common. But you could, even if you just made some of those declarations up front, even as you're just getting to know the person, you're going to find out really quickly the kinds of people you're going to draw in. And you're going to also notice, like, if they're just interested in the transaction, I would just pass. Because I think there's just so many good people now who are getting clearer and clearer that every season of their life is a critical season and they don't want to waste it. So I 100% agree with you. It's the intentionality of how you are onboarding someone, enrolling them in your culture, and really setting the trajectory of the invisible space between the people. That's the culture.
So interesting. This is such a unique perspective. And at the same time, it's so validating
Hmm.
because as somebody who has run multiple companies and my clients are flying at high altitudes,
Hmm.
you see this tension between what I need you to do as an employee and what you're willing to do, or how you're willing to show up and how I need you to show up, in this natural friction that happens in
Hmm.
this relationship that, as you had so poignantly pointed out, comes from a time and place that we are no longer living in,
That's
that
right.
we no longer exist in, and this dynamic that has probably even become more important in this day and time of being in this year of COVID, and that people are probably looking at their life and the people around them and questioning, is this where I'm supposed to be? Is this where I want to be? Is this the highest, best use of my contribution to the world? And I think many people are having that conversation this year
Hmm.
that weren't already happy with where they were. And it's been this magnifying glass, I think, on so many people's lives. And
Yeah.
I love your approach to it. And I also know that your podcast also looks at this difference between something that is meaningful and then also finding a way that meaningful activities and tasks and products and services can also be profitable.
Mhm.
Has this been also sort of this challenge within your own company, as well as you're going in and you're helping people with employee issues when the CFO might be, just looking at net profit every month?
Yeah. Yeah. I just spoke with a company right before this conversation, without naming names or locations. So it's a distribution company. They do about $100 million a year, and they have about 175 employees in 2 locations in the US. And both places have very different cultures. They're very different kinds of cities. Maybe a quarter of their employees are in one spot, totally different demographic of groups of people, and the other is another spot. And because they're distribution, they're primarily blue collar, with a maybe 15% of the entire staff are kind of more white collar. Um, and and in that conversation, yes, they should be, the CFO should be asking the question, what's the ROI on an investment in an employee? And we pay these people very little, so how do we get in response? And every investment should be a return on investment. I agree with that. And honestly, the biggest challenge for us is kind of what I alluded to earlier, is people assume tell me your dreams is woo woo and altruistic, and you should do that. And um, I can't overstate how radically pragmatic this is. Example is, one of the organizations we work with is an accounting firm here in Southern California. And before they hired us, they were just trucking along. They had a highly scaled accounting firm, um, and then somebody on their staff committed suicide. And the reality of how radically out of touch they were with their team was just made plain in front of everyone. They had no stinking clue, because they were just making money, and they thought, and we everything must be great. In the month of March alone, the suicide prevention hotline went up. The calls went up 8,000%
Wow.
in 1 month. And this is, and the COVID like reality is, it was a reveal. It wasn't just a cause. It
Right.
and like my son, he's 21, he's a junior in college, and he started doing the mindfulness app or whatever. And he's like,
Yeah.
Dad, the more I do mindfulness, the more I'm anxious. I'm like, oh, Drew, you were anxious way before you started the app. You're just noticing that that's happening right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's the odd gift of this season, is if the smart progressive owner, I think, is the one who's going to tune in this season and go, what is showing up right now that was probably here before, but we just didn't have eyes to see, because it's probably just been amplified for a moment. And if we're smart, we're going to tune into that, because this kind of idea of investing in your people while you have them, um, the stakes are just so radically high. Uh, People, especially in COVID life, they're all working from home. They have no capacity to build a structural framework for their lives. No one ever taught them to. The work did that.
Right.
They showed up, work did all that work, and now they have to do it on their own. Why would we expect that they would have that skill set just out of nowhere? All the owners of companies don't have those skill sets. They're the ones who are kind of juggling food behind them on Zoom calls, and you know all the disruptions. Well, our employees downstream, they're all dealing with that. So if you don't have some sense of like what mechanism by which we tune into people and how they're doing, your people will degrade in their capacity to contribute. There's no question. And so if I'm the CFO asking the question, how do we get a return on this? We need to find a metric for that engagement. And thankfully we have Gallup and a whole bunch of great organizations that are measuring some of these things. But I think even just establishing some kind of a baseline, if someone never ever wants to talk to us or hire Team WD, some immediate advice I'd encourage is establish some kind of cultural baseline, measure something, and go, how will we tell that people are flourishing here? Are they in
Mhm.
survival mode, or are they in thriving mode? Like, where are they at? And figure out some metric to measure, and then keep measuring it, and try things like make little bets, in your culture to see if there's kind of a sense of the values that you're hoping will continue showing up will improve.
Very cool. All right. This is so, so good. And I know that so many people who are listening um, probably feel very validated. They feel uh, that, wow, this is the missing piece that I didn't even realize I needed within my company.
Hmm.
And when you're a leader and you're a visionary and you're a driver and you are somebody who just moves to the next goal without really looking at what is happening around you because you're so busy,
Yeah,
you just needing to keep things afloat, it's really easy to miss, I think, probably, the person coming and going from your organization that really just needs more than a paycheck right now,
yeah.
and needs more from the organization. So let's say that somebody wants to get in touch with you. They want to learn more about your company. They would like to talk to you about bringing you in. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. Dane Sanders, kind of anywhere on the internet. You can find me pretty quick at Dane Sanders or danesanders.com personally. But for the organization, tellmeyourdreams.com. Tellmeyourdreams.com is the easiest place. I will say, I do hope some folks reach out candidly, not necessarily to hire us, but to at least have the conversation. I think that the stakes have never been more high, and I think that um, the process of engaging this conversation is a long-term process. It's not lickety split. Even if you brought us in, it's not like, oh, 90 days later, you have an amazing culture and everything's incredible. What you'll learn in 90 days is things will get um, illuminated. And with that, you have new good data to do something with that information. Um, but if there are folks that are beginning to ask that question, what would it look like for us to not just care about our employees, but care so that our employees give their best when they're here. And also, we know deep down we're contributing to their trajectory well beyond here. Um, and they want to not only ward off the horrible stories of when people are they really are not flourishing in life that happen to be under your care in the season you have them, and especially if you're running so fast, like the target you described. That is the conversation. It's just so tough to be an executive running a scaling organization and slow the train down. I don't think you're going to be able to do it on your own. So to find some group to have come in and have a conversation, not just to give more content, but to really think through a strategy that you could implement and measure uh, the, the improvement and culture over time. I would love to be in that conversation if for only just to point people in the right direction and get out of the way. So thanks for that request, Laura.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I have no doubt that you are so helpful in that conversation. So, and I appreciate you being here and being part of this conversation. It was great to have you. And I know our listeners got so much from it. Again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Laura, I need to say this. Thank you for leading. I think what you're doing in this context here and for the whole career we've known each other, and what I would expect for many years to come is it's a big deal. It's very generous of you to make these kinds of contributions to folks who are listening, and I'm just grateful for your leadership. Thank you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for saying that. It means a ton. And I'm excited to see where your company takes you. I know you're off to doing amazing things.